Hi everybody, this is Kristy Davis. I'm here with Darcy Schoening today to talk to you about House Bill 24-1039, the non-legal name change bill. This bill became a law on April 29th when Governor Polis signed it. It was proposed and sponsored by Stephanie Vigil and Brianna Tatone. They are our trans and non-binary House reps. And what this bill, now law, says is that our school boards all have to create a policy called the non-legal name change policy and allow students to change their legal name to a chosen name of their choice. And the sample policy that the state government and CASB, Colorado Association of School Boards, states that you do not need parental approval. And so what Darcy and I have done is created a policy that we are going to send to all of the school boards that puts full parental consent. So I'll let Darcy talk about the policy.
Hello, so I will start with the policy. We have created a template policy for school districts across the state of Colorado. And what's great about this template is that it's not just one option. If you pull up the policy that we have constructed, there's several different options available to you. Obviously, we recommend adding every single clause to this policy for maximum protection of students. But this is really up to the individual district as to how they implement it. So our policy starts off by defining what is gender, what is a legal name, and then what is a non-legal name change. For the context of this bill, it's important to know the difference between a legal name change and a non-legal name change. So a legal name change happens when I go to the courthouse and I say, I no longer am Darcy, I'm Daniel, and they change that on my driver's license, or they change it in my legal records. That's a legal name change. This policy doesn't apply to legal name changes. It applies to non-legal name changes. So to start off with, what we're recommending is that school districts pass this policy with the very first component of the policy being that there must be parental consent for a child to come in and change their name to something other than that which they were assigned, or that which their parents named them when they were born. So alternatively, some school districts, which school district did notification and not consent?
So we have 3 charters that have passed full parental consent. It's Monument Academy, New Summit Charter, and TCA. And we have 3 school districts, District 49 in El Paso County. District 11 is going to talk about it at their work session to add full parental consent. And D38 has a process and a form for full parental consent.
Okay, so there are no school districts so far that have opted to do notification and not consent.
There's 3 school districts that have chosen to do no parental consent,
right,
but not informing.
Okay, so that's another option. Obviously, we would recommend asking for parental consent. I don't know what good it is to notify the parents, other than, as Kristy and I were talking about last night, I mean, it's better than nothing. So if that's what a school district does, it's better than nothing. But, if my daughter came home and I found out that she was identifying as another gender because it's the cool thing to do, or whatever the heck is going on in these schools today, the school can say that I didn't give consent all they want, but if they inform me, I mean, it's going to be as simple as you're not identifying as another gender. You're going to go to mental health treatment and perhaps an inpatient facility if that's where this is heading. But parents have ultimate control if they're decent parents. So I guess for some school districts, I could see how they would go with notification. But again, we would recommend going with full parental consent. One thing that Kristy suggested very strongly that was brought into this policy, which originated at Monument Academy, I believe, is that instead of asking for one signature for a child to change their gender or their legal name at school, we decided to go ahead and ask for both parents or legal guardians or I guess the more proper way to say it would be any parents or legal guardians that are on file with the school. In theory, people could have only one. I mean, there's some kids only have one, or you could have three, I guess. I mean, I've seen it before. So that's another protection. The reason that we did that is because it's really important that if one parent is not on board with gender transitioning, that this battle is fought outside of the school.
Yes.
So what we didn't want was one parent who's angry, repeatedly harassing the school, or putting staff in a position where they have divorce fights in the school. So we just went ahead and said anybody that's on file has to go ahead and sign if their child doesn't want to identify by their chosen name. So there's another part of this policy that is another snag that we went ahead and addressed in here, which is, I don't know how many of you guys remember being in high school, but I got pretty good at signing my mom's name and my dad's name. So I'm sure kids today are no different. So in the template that we are putting out tonight, what it says is that after the child and the parents both sign the form, it gets sent, it goes to the school, the vice principal or the principal signs it, and then the form is emailed and physically mailed to the addresses on file for the guardians. So that there's no doubt that if there's a bad signature, it's gonna come, the parents are gonna find out. There are other things that schools could build into that to make sure that the signatures are valid. For example, you could say, let's notarize these forms. That is an alternative. Or you could say, this form has to be signed in person. So both legal guardians have to present to the school at some point to go ahead and sign that. Another important aspect of this that we're seeing school districts do is say that you can only have X number of legal name changes per year. So in this template, we've specified you can only change your name once per year.
Or semester.
Or
Some of the
semester.
school districts are doing per semester. It's going to be an administrative nightmare if children are allowed to change their names daily, hourly. The state did not specify in the bill. So in order to alleviate that, schools are choosing to only allow once a year unless you're going back to your legal name, or once a semester.
Yes. So obviously, once again, we would recommend as few changes per year as possible. And I have to say, I mean, if you're a child and you have to change your name more than once per school year because you're identifying as something else, again, that is a mental health issue. The school doesn't need to be changing files like 8 times per year. That is just mental illness, and that needs to be addressed and not addressed in a file change. And then lastly, one of the most important things about 1039 is that it does have the potential to make its way through the courts. There's already a family suing in Brighton,
Colorado,
over this. It's compelled speech, it's forced speech.
Mm-hmm.
So for me as a Catholic, for example, it is against my religion to refer to Kristy as a he, because there's no such thing. So about 3 or 4 months ago, we actually put out a policy for schools to go ahead and call for teachers to turn in religious exemptions. And the religious exemption policy could either be passed by your school district, or individual teachers could just turn in religious exemption forms. But it's important to really consider this religious exemption aspect as the ACA policy is written for each school district, because one of the sentences that is in the state of Colorado's version of the ACA policy, which CASB is passing around, says staff shall use the student's preferred name, and not doing so could be considered discrimination if it's purposeful, and that staff member would be subject to disciplinary action as spelled out in House Bill 1039. But if the staff member has said this is against my religion, then that's something that needs to be strongly considered, and then that staff member needs to stick by that, because it is forced compelled speech.
Yes.
And we do want to see these cases make their way through the courts.
And the same for students. Students also cannot be compelled to speak.
Yeah. So, and we hear that all the time, students being kicked out of high schools or junior highs because their classmate who used to be named Danielle is now Daniel, and these students who are Christian or just don't believe in this for whatever reason. I mean, well, the reason is because it's not science, it's fantasy, it's like sci-fi, then they shouldn't be compelled to do that. So if you are writing your ACA policy and you feel strongly that staff shouldn't be forced to use these pronouns or give their non-legal name, then we would recommend building the religious exemption policy into ACA. At a minimum, I would recommend having those religious exemption forms on file for teachers, and I actually do believe that if you don't have those on file and allow that as an out for this forced speech, then as these cases are adjudicated, the school district could be held liable for violating your staff's constitutional rights.
And that's what the state is constantly doing. They're forcing the school districts to be put in between a rock and a hard place with all of this stuff. The state is not liable. It's the school district.
Yeah.
So school districts should be protecting themselves.
Yeah. So the more robust policy that you present for ACA, the more that the students are protected from the gender ideology that's coming from our trans, non-binary reps who don't have children, have never had a family, and don't know what they're doing. Or, but it also protects the school districts from potentially being sued by telling staff and students that you don't have an option. I mean, this is America. We're not going to slide so far into this ideology that we're living like the people in Great Britain or Australia or Canada. We have
chilling
to.
speech.
Yeah.
They're chilling speech. They're making people afraid to say things.
Yeah. So, to me, this is probably one of the worst bills that has passed as far as education goes in Colorado, because of the fact that it is just going to become so widespread now. Every student who doesn't belong, has an identity crisis, is being bullied, just doesn't look like they fit into a school. Back when we were in high school, those people were just dealt with. Like they assimilated. I mean, the schools would tell them, you can't show up with 18 colors of hair, smelling like you just crawled out of a dumpster, and wearing a cape and identifying as a she, he, whatever. And the football players handled that. And now, because of political correctness and all the things going on, we're in a situation where these people are being praised instead of treated. And it has to stop. We have to put a stop to this for our kids.
Yep. I was talking to the chapter chairs of Moms for Liberty in California, and they said the students are allowed to have pet beds underneath their desks, and they are allowed to do their lessons from the floor.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah. And they have litter boxes in all the bathrooms.
This is like the level of insanity that we are at. I mean, I'm going to reiterate what I've always said. if I had kids in public school, I would get them out. I would get them out immediately, whatever it takes, charter, private, homeschool, I don't know, grandma can teach them. It's better at this point than what's going on in these schools. So,
the important thing with 1039 is to make sure that your school districts are choosing our parental consent policy over the state government written policy that excludes parents. The first thing that we do for our children is give them a name. And we need to make sure that they are going by that name. And if they're not, it needs to be a choice between us and our children, not between the school and our children. Because we're going to have adults calling our children another name that we are totally unaware of, and that is completely unacceptable.
It's the basic foundation of who our kids are and who we are. When you find out you're pregnant, the first thing that you think of is like, what's the sex of the baby going to be? What am I going to name my baby? Yeah. And so for the state to usurp that and say that it's okay for schools and governments to allow your child to identify as something else is just a huge step in the way of separating child from family and telling children that the government knows best. And that's what the legislature here has been doing for years and years and years, but it's really kicked up a notch, and it seems like the more transgender, non-binary legislators that come into the Colorado Capitol, the worse that our laws get. And it's so sad. I mean, you look at Stephanie V. Hill. I mean, she couldn't find a normal job if her life depended on it. I mean, she couldn't. She doesn't even have the mental capacity to make a latte, but she's making laws for our children, and she's never had a child. And, you know, every single one of these people is just so far on the gender ideology spectrum. I was researching Vivian Smotherman, who's running against Cleve Simpson out in, it's either Senate 5 or Senate 6. I get those two confused. I think it's Senate 6. And people were sending me more stuff over the last couple weeks. And it's like, you know, she's at the county fair making penis-shaped balloons for the kids. And she's on YouTube talking to, he's on YouTube talking about his kids having sex in front of him and playing these sex slave master games on Twitter. And these are the people that want to make laws for our children. I wouldn't let them watch my dog. Mm-hmm. So I probably sound really critical. I should be quiet tonight. Okay. So if you guys have any questions about this policy, you can contact Kristy or myself. We'll be happy to edit, amend the policy for you as you want it, make it less strict, more strict. But like we said, what we really wanted to do was provide something other than what CASB is providing. Remember, CASB's part of the state government. They're not your friends. They don't want local control or autonomy. They don't care about students or families. They're here to enforce the will of Denver, of the legislature. So in general, if CASB's sending you a document and saying this should look like your new policy, just throw it in the trash and find a new one. Call one of us, call the state GOP, call your county GOP, call whoever, but they don't put anything out that's good.
Yeah, and the bill is not very long, so it only takes about 5 minutes to read the entire thing. So you can see what's in there and what's not. And there is nothing about not informing parents in that bill. So full parental consent, any school board can put into the language of their policies. And we encourage that.
Yeah. So Kristy's been working really hard on this, and every school district that she's been able to get to not use the state's policy is, you know, it's a group of hundreds of kids that are protected from this. Look at all the kids that say they wish they wouldn't have transitioned. They wish their parents wouldn't have participated in this. I mean, that's why kids can't get tattoos at the age of 15, it's because you don't think the same 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. So it's not that we want to tell kids, you know, you can never be transgender, or you can never do this or that. I mean, in an ideal situation, they wouldn't be, but
we just want people informing their
Yeah.
parents. That's what the parents and the child decide. Great, but you shouldn't be removing the parents from the situation and making that decision with a school district and the government.
Yeah. So we'll get those policies up. There's a whole, it's a package of policies. So it's the ACA policy. The religious exemption policy will be in the same folder. There's also instructions in the folder for how you might deviate from this policy some, make it more strict, less strict, whatever school districts want to do. And then there's some forms for if you have staff or students that want the religious exemption. There's also a suggested parental consent form, but those are pretty straightforward. So, and you know, school districts have those in abundance. But again, if you guys have any questions or if there's anything that we can help you with, just contact one of us, and we'll even come out to whatever school district that you are in, because it's so important that this gets passed now. If it doesn't, we're just going to have thousands and thousands of kids across the state that are suddenly a new gender because for whatever reasons. So
And their parents won't know about it. They won't be able to help them.
Yeah, exactly.
We need parents to advocate for their children right now. You need to take our policies to your school boards, call your school board members, write them emails, let them know about this. We're going to be getting it out to as many school districts as we can, but they need to hear from parents in their school districts. So please reach out and let them know you want full parental consent added to the policy ACA non-legal name change.
Yeah, and reach out to your county GOP offices. Sometimes they're unaware of these things, and if you tell them I'm working on getting our school board, so Douglas County, have they passed this yet?
I am not sure.
Okay, well, I'm just going to use them as an excuse because as an example, because I don't think that they have. So, for example, Douglas County, it's just one school board. I think El Paso is one of the only ones that has like 92 school boards. But Douglas is just one, and they have a very, very robust and effective, hardworking GOP office. So if I were working with Douglas County School Board and I started reaching barriers, I would really make sure that I reached out to the leaders in the Douglas County GOP and said, hey, you know, some of these people that you helped get elected, or perhaps some didn't, we've got to put the squeeze on them. We've got to make sure that they do the right thing, and tell them, you know, you're not gonna be elected again if you don't protect kids. So it's important that we fight this on all fronts. Post about it, tweet about it, share this video, but we've got to protect as many kids as we can.
And make sure you're looking at your children's school board agenda to see if the non-legal name change policy or policy ACA is coming up, and make sure you read that policy to see what the language states, because a lot of these school boards are just taking CASB's policy because it's another thing they have to do because it's mandated by the state, and they're just going to pass it.
Yeah.
That's what's happened in 3 of our districts already down here in El Paso County. They've done their first read. Nobody was aware of it. It's just passing through. So I'm trying to get parents in that district to advocate and say, no, we want full parental consent, and I will also be sending emails to those boards.
That's awesome. And if you guys encounter any school board members that are being stubborn, obviously, you know, especially if they're Republican, let us know, because we'll get that out there in emails and text messages and posts, and make sure that those board members really feel the pressure and the pain that are coming from parents that are just so bothered by this most basic parental right being denied to them.
Yeah, we will be creating lists of schools that do parental consent and schools that omit parental consent. And hopefully all of our like-minded school boards will be on the full parental consent list.
I don't think we've ever said it that way, but let's just go ahead and say it. I mean, we're going to be tracking this.
We will be.
So if you're a Republican, D20, D11, Douglas County, and you're not protecting your students, you're gonna have a hard year. So that's all I think I need to say about it. But thank you all. Sorry for the threats. If you need anything, just let one of us know, and thank you for all you guys do.
Thanks.